As you know, this week the Federal Reserve is going to be meeting to raise interest rates, and most likely it's going to be 50 basis points. That's usually what it is. What they say ahead of time usually ends up what being. And part of what's going to happen is you're going to be looking at their particular language on their explanation of that and their forecast. Now, our stock's going to be going up or down. Now, it depends who you ask. If you take a look at this chart here, this is kind of a fun one. There are different groups, and your choices are like, so which is the best trade, going into the Federal Reserve meeting. Is it the long U.S. stocks? Is it short U.S. stocks? Is it long the dollar or short the dollar? So, according to retail investors, they think long U.S. stocks is the way to go. If you're a senior management or high level asset allocation, or say portfolio manager, or maybe an economist, you're like, you know what? I'm going short U.S. stocks. If you're a buy-side trader, you're short the dollar, and there's a bunch of other, different groups on there you guys can see for yourself. Even risk managers are also short U.S. stocks. So people are feeling kind of bearish, and this is a survey done December 5th through the 9th, so fairly up to date. I myself do remain bearish because interest rates are still going up, and it seems like there's a lot of weak things happening in the economy in 2023. However, retail investors, they think long U.S. stock is the best. So love to hear you guys' thoughts on that one. Also, too, which is kind of interesting, when they're asked the same group, what do you think 2023 is going to be? 65% say mild recession. 19% you're like, you know what, no recession, and 60% are like a long and ugly recession. So I'm mixed between the mild and the long and ugly one myself. I do remain bearish. Also, too, when will the Fed start cutting rates? And this is actually a really interesting debate. What you can do, you can certainly look at history and get a general sense of how long it takes, because one of the things I want you to think about is the U.S. economy, or even a world economy for that matter, is kind of like an aircraft carrier. You can't just turn it on a dime. It moves slowly, right? And one of the things that you want to be thinking about is, okay, looking back in the past, you guys can see this for yourself. This is essentially the when the rates are the highest, and then how long does it take before they cut? The average is about 11 months. And the language that the Fed has kept saying is essentially we're going to be raising interest rates, and we're going to have that sustained for longer because we want to bring inflation down. And remember, their target inflation is about 2%. Currently, inflation in the PCE, sort of how they measure it, is about 6. So we're 3 times where they want it to be. And this just gives you a general guide. So, if we're like in the 97, 98 kind of thing, you're looking at 18 months. If you want to go for short, 95, looking like a 5 months. So average is 11 months. Love to hear you guys' thoughts on this one, but this just gives you guys some sort of guide. The other thing, too, which I think is worth mentioning, is things that are happening in our politics are a bit strange these days. Everything is strange. The world is strange. And every time I look at the news, I'm just like, okay, how do I put this together? Like, even make sense. We did like a prisoner exchange thing. This was like a basketball player with essentially some sort of like criminal drug dealer guy or something. I think this one is a weird one. And if you are about to bash Biden, I think this is a good chance to do that. So, full disclosure, I don't like Biden that much. I didn't like Trump that much either, but what are you going to do? I think this was be an easy attack on Biden if you want to do that. And I saw this thing, and I just find it so bizarre. So if anyone has any explanation on this one, please let me know. I read through this stuff, and I'm just like, okay, so why are we swapping prisoners? But yeah, because and the reason why is why you could attack is because you could have taken a number of people if you're going to swap prisoners, I guess. And there is a particular soldier that probably conservative media will go after. They said you should have taken the soldier, not the basketball player. Sure, I think that's a fair attack. So I just want to mention that. Also, too, which I think is going to be under fire as well in our politics, is Janet Yellen gave essentially an interview on 60 Minutes, and she said, this is the quote, that basically they're going to give money to Ukraine as long as it takes. And I think this is going to be a fairly contentious issue going forward when we head into recession. People are losing their jobs, and things are going to be really expensive. Essentially, like, people go to the grocery store and like, well, okay, so my eggs are $6 for a dozen. Why are we sending money to Ukraine? I totally get it, guys. And I just keep saying that politically, I think this is going to be tough to carry through into recession. And we'll see how this plays out. Also, too, which is a very, very similar issue to the U.S., to where people go into recession and people are going to be unhappy, is in fact things are getting worse in England. I spent some time going through all these things. I've been tracking a couple of these stories for a while. If you've been following the channel, we've been talking about the rail strikes in the USA, but evidently they are going more hardcore in Britain regarding the rail strikes. And in fact, it is not just the rail people. I guess it's like the ambulance people. It's going to be some nurses and all kinds of different industries. And they're in England. They're even calling in the military to come and try to replace said people for temporary, because you can't do that forever. And then the other thing is too is they're telling people in England like to not be traveling. It could be a really, really horrible situation. My understanding, I was looking through it. The workers want like essentially raises around like 9-10%. I read one thing that said the nurses want like 15%. It's actually quite a lot. But inflation is quite a lot, right? If your energy costs are, say, like literally in England, say double, I mean, you need, they're not going to double your salary, but I'm saying you need a sizable pay increase to offset that. The problem is, of course, is this is where inflation becomes really, really tricky, not just in England, but everywhere around the world, is that when, companies or say the rail lines, right, are raising their wages, that raises the cost, of course, and then you need to charge customers more, etc. Now, there could be a case to be made, for example, that companies and CEOs should take less profits, less earnings. I could totally see that world. However, obviously, then you piss off shareholders. So you have this basically contentious situation where there's just not enough money to go around. And I think going into recession, you're going to see a lot more of these kind of things. Sticking with the theme of instability or unstable world, Peru is actually really crazy right now. As you guys can see this here, they had essentially a attempted coup, and then they removed the guy, arrested him, but his followers, it's Castilla is his name, are still out protesting, and unfortunately, some people have been killed already. Let me read the description for you guys, because I want you to understand this. It's like really, really crazy. You can see this here. This is in Peru. We have some people in the community in Peru also. So if you have any thoughts, please share. Hundreds of people also protested in Lima, the capital, where riot police used tear gas to push the protesters back. The protest rocking crew heated up, particularly in rural areas, strongholds for Castillo. That's the guy who essentially has been replaced. A former school teacher and political newcomer from a poor Andean mountain district. And this is the part I want you guys to hear. Protesters set fire to a police station, vandalized a small airport used by the armed forces, and marched in the streets. Also, too, moreover, to show you guys like how unstable it is, it's saying here, Peru had 6 presidents in the last 6 years, including 3 in a single week in 2020 when Congress flexed its impeachment powers, and evidently they're still dealing with COVID. The reason why I bring up the Peru thing, and I'm also talking about U.S. politics and also talking about in England, is there's varying degrees of how you deal with change of power and how you deal with instability. So one of the things that made me really uncomfortable during the last election cycle, actually the 2016 election cycle, well, Donald Trump essentially had all the supporters chanting at many, many rallies, lock her up, lock her up, lock her up, that kind of thing. And I get it. If you guys like Trump, you're all about that, and you're all about locking up your political opponents. But I want you just to understand the ramifications of this kind of language and this kind of political rhetoric. And I want you to take a look at, say, Peru, for example, to where, in my opinion, part of what makes democracy work is that you have an election, people vote, they decide who they want to win, right? It's an election. And then there's a peaceful exchange of power that is vital to democracy. And this idea that if suddenly, like, for example, if our political culture goes to where every time we have an election, we say, hey, vote for me, and if you vote for me, I'm going to put my opponent in prison. I hope you understand the seriousness of that kind of talk. And, I try to, I laugh a little bit, but it's just like, it's mostly because it's just like so ridiculously crazy. And especially what you see what's happening in Peru. I just hope you guys understand that the peaceful exchange of power is extremely important to democracy, and I can't stress that enough. I also try my best to talk about these issues with you, be it finance, economics, and also politics as well. One of the things is which I think is really quite interesting is how do we define corruption, political corruption, and what should we do if, say, politicians are doing bad things, right? Should they pay a penalty or not? So yes, I think if a politician breaks some kind of law, yes, they should pay some sort of penalty. I think that's part of also fundamental democracy is rule of law, and also that no one is above the law. Now, this particular issue is an interesting one. Is AOC, right? So She's a popular person to attack if you're a person of the right, a popular candidate. And essentially, she's under investigation by the ethics committee. And I'll explain to you what the alleged charge is, and then we'll go through whether or not it has any teeth. But the basic gist of it is that she went to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. It's called the Met Gala. It's like a charity fundraiser. Of many people go to this thing, and essentially is she went for free. And the question is, did someone buy her ticket, right? Be it like a company or something like that, and that would essentially be a donation, and she didn't declare that, or was she invited directly by the gala itself? Before you start going on, that the Metropolitan Museum of Art is evil and all this stuff like that, and it's only for elitists, just understand that Donald Trump and Melania have gone there several times. It's in New York. It's not like a crazy thing to say. I was also looking too. Hillary Clinton and Mitt Romney have also been to this as well as my wife and I. We have not gone to the Met Gala, but you can find an old video that we've been to the Metropolitan Museum of Art as well. And I've been there several times. I like the place. It's a brilliant place, and I recommend you guys to go. And if you do have the money to go to the Met Gala, definitely go. But I want to just bring this up because I don't think necessarily I'm burying said story or anything like that. I'm mentioning it very, very clearly that there's an ethics thing here, and we'll see if anything comes of it. My first glance at it, though, it seems like nothing. It's not even really worth mentioning, but I am mentioning it because I do want to emphasize that in a democracy and in a country with rules of laws, I'd rather have things essentially sorted out peacefully and fairly. That's a good way to put it. And one of the crazy things though is, unfortunately, you may have people out there that will to start immediately chanting "lock her up, lock her up, lock her up." And I just told you essentially what the charges are, and you can decide if anything is going on with that, and we'll keep track of it. So yes, if something was if her ticket was bought by a company and she did some sort of campaign a promise or something like that regarding said money, sure, absolutely, 100%. So, but I think we should be fair in any number of these things, and also to understand that many people do go to these events. Also, too, going on, which I think is really related to these things, as the recession kicks in, as we talked about, be it the markets, be it politics, these kind of things, is we're going to get worsening problems. And one of the problems which I think is a very, very difficult one to solve, I just want to mention because I was reading about this. There's a new mayor in LA. Her name is Bass. And it was interesting because I used to live in LA, and I can tell you guys, homelessness is a horrible, horrible, horrible problem. It is not an easy solve. And one of the proposals is basically just build a bunch of new houses for said people. But I mean, where's that money going to come from? Well, you raise property taxes, that kind of thing. But obviously it's not that popular of a thing to do. It is not an easy problem. And I was looking at it, just look at the headlines here. You can see in LA, just read it for yourself. Robberies, drought, tent camps. Los Angeles next mayor faces litany of crises, and it's sad to see, but unfortunately, I think these things are going to get worse before they get better, especially going into recession. And I just want you to think about all these things together. Of when we have discussions like this on the channel, I try my best to have a reasonable discussion about these things, because I hope that we can come to solutions and solve these problems, and also to change the dialogue of how we talk about said things. That's why we talk about Peru. I don't want to devolve into that kind of society. And I can promise you that that isn't the only situation or way to deal with problems with, through violence or these kind of things. If you guys are following the protests in Korea, I can show you guys these. So there was a series of corruption charges against President Park. This is in South Korea, and we're in Korea now. And a lot of my friends were out in these protests. A lot of my students were out in these things as well, and they were all peaceful. And they call them essentially the candlelight protests. And basically, if you don't know, President Park ended up going to prison. And there was this, it's really weird story though, where she was essentially taking advice from a cult leader. I'm not making it up. It's really, really crazy stuff like that. And politics in Korea are really, really bizarre. Because these kind of things, for example, the president goes to prison, and you would think that would be the end of the party, but it's not. They come back and they can still win, which is pretty nuts. And one of the things which I think also too, which relates sort of where in the world that we are now, is that going back to any number of the issues that we talk about, I just think keep an eye on rule of law, being fair, and also too being honest about said situations. So I try my best on the channel, and it's sort of funny how I just share with you guys if I talk about economics or finance or business, people say, "Oh, Chris, you know what you're talking about. You're so smart." And suddenly, if I talk about politics, people are like, "Oh, Chris, you're so dumb. You know what you're talking about." And to me, it's all the same. I think if you want to do well in this world, you read facts, you read as many things as you can, and have reasonable, opinions of unsaid facts, right? I don't just make random stuff up. And also, too, which I think is valuable as well, is understand where the important things are and where the turning points could be. Because oftentimes, again, people ask me, how did I know about the FTX thing? It's because, I read everything that I possibly can and try to figure out where the turning points could be. So, for example, in this situation here, just for example, with the AOC situation at the Met Gala, what we're looking for is who bought her ticket. That's it. That's all it is. Any other stuff would be a sideshow, right? And you have to understand what would be illegal, what would be legal. Also, too, another example, which I think is a story worth tracking as well, is what happened to Do Hyun Kwan or Kwan Do Hyun, however you want to say his name. But basically, he's the guy who did the Terra Luna stuff. He's Korean. It turns out he's in Serbia. True story. I actually thought he was going to go to Russia. I just figured that would be the place that you're going to run if you're trying to run away from the government and commit some sort of crypto crime. But evidently he's in Serbia. At least that's what the reports are. Who knows? I mean, now that the report's out, he may be on the run again. And this is the kind of stuff which I think is interesting to track because it sounds like a movie, but yet it's real life. And so we'll keep tracking all of these different stories and see if they are capturing him and see what happens with the Fed rate hikes. I think it's going to be 50 basis points and see what happens with the market. Always appreciate everyone's conversation that we have daily. I try to do this for you, and I'll catch you in the next time.